listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. This podcast is all about expanding the conversation around infidelity. I'm a relationship coach, and I help people who are cheating on their partners deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. As we all know, there are plenty of negative, dogmatic perspectives on infidelity out there. But I hope you look at your infidelity situation as a puzzle that can be solved rather than a big, bad problem that has to be fixed. You won't get any shame, blame, or judgments from me. To learn more about my work or to schedule an introductory coaching session with me, go to my website, mariemurphyphd.com. All right. So for a lot of the clients who come to me who are married and are cheating on their spouse or have been cheating on their spouse, the cheating isn't the main issue. It's an important facet of their situation, of course. But quite often, the elephant in the room is the question of whether they want to leave their marriage or not. And many people find this question absolutely terrifying to even consider contemplating. And if we can't consider entertaining this question, then we can't examine the matter systematically or thoroughly. And we can't come to a clear decision about what we want to do. And since people find this question so frightening or overwhelming to contemplate, a lot of folks deal with this question by sweeping it under the rug for weeks or months or even longer, hoping that if they avoid the issue, all of their nagging concerns will resolve themselves or magically disappear or otherwise cease to matter. And I want to suggest that although this approach is not particularly helpful or effective, it is completely understandable, totally human, and even fairly reasonable, albeit in a dysfunctional sort of way. And the reason why is because when we come upon a problem that seems impossible to solve, it may make sense to us to attempt to avoid the problem or to pretend like the problem isn't actually a problem. And for a lot of people, being unhappy in a marriage or being unsatisfied in a marriage or a committed relationship seems like an unsolvable problem. Wanting to leave a marriage seems like an unsolvable problem for a lot of folks. Many people believe something along the lines of this: since they got married, they have to stay married. And these folks usually also know in the abstract that people do get divorced. Marriages do come to an end, and ending their own marriage is theoretically an option that is available to them. And there are a lot of reasons why people believe that they have to stay married or they can't get divorced, even if divorce is an option and other people do, in fact, exercise that option. And, here are some of these reasons. These may sound familiar to you. Some people are concerned about what will happen with their relationship with their kids if they get divorced. Or more to the point, they're afraid that their relationship with their kids will be ruined. And we recently did a podcast episode on this with Abigail Wald. Go back and listen to that one if this is a subject of concern for you. Some people are worried about what other people will think of them if they get divorced. For some folks, no one in their family has ever gotten divorced. So if they did, they would be the first one to do so. Some people are sure that if they got divorced, other people would blame them for the end of the marriage and the breakup of their family. Some people are sure that if they got divorced, they will ruin other people's lives or at the very least cause irreparable harm to people they care about. Some people are afraid of all of the bureaucratic aspects of getting divorced and all of the work involved in legally and administratively separating their life from their spouse's life. Some people are worried about the financial ramifications of divorce. This is a big concern for a lot of people. And let me just say that this concern is not dependent on how much money a person has. Some folks who have a lot of money, relatively speaking, worry just as much about the financial consequences of a divorce, if not more than people who have little money, relatively speaking. It's not about the money. Some people worry about where they'll live in the future. Getting divorced may mean a change in your living arrangements, and you may not like the idea of changing your living arrangements. Moreover, you might believe that you can't change your living arrangements without something terrible happening. Some people are afraid of getting divorced only to later realize that they made the wrong decision or discover that the grass is always greener on the other side. Some people are worried that if they get divorced, they'll be sad and lonely forever. Some people are worried that their spouse will make their life a living hell if they ask for a divorce. Sometimes people are concerned that their spouse will do things to them that will have a terrible effect on their lives or perhaps their children's lives if they get divorced. Sometimes people are just terrified of change. And even if they know they're unhappy in their marriage, they also can't imagine what life would look like beyond their current circumstances or beyond being in their marriage. And this is just a partial list, of course. There are plenty more reasons why people are afraid to get divorced or believe that they can't get divorced. And in a sense, these concerns are potentially reasonable. Divorce can certainly be a major life event, and sometimes it is a very difficult and unpleasant life event. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. Divorce usually involves change and maybe a fair amount of upheaval. And sometimes the specific things we fear will happen if we get divorced do happen. For instance, our budget might indeed change. Our financials may change. We may have to move, and we may feel lonely at times. Here's the thing, though. We can acknowledge fears like these without letting them stop us from allowing ourselves to contemplate the question of whether or not we might want to leave our marriage. And often people do let fears like those stop them from simply contemplating whether or not they want to end their marriage. Consider this: by allowing yourself to seriously and honestly examine why you might want to stay married and why you might not want to stay married, you are not committing to taking any action. We're talking about doing a thought exercise here. We're not talking about taking action just yet. Now, sometimes people tell me that they fear the thought exercise because they're afraid that if they acknowledge their dissatisfaction in their marriage, the implication will be that they have to take action. And sometimes they assume that that action might entail getting a divorce. But when we assume what's going to happen, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. You don't know what you will discover by examining your dissatisfaction in your marriage until you actually do it. You may discover all sorts of things. You may find that your discontent in your marriage stems from sources you weren't aware of that may not have anything to do with your spouse. You may discover that even if you have been unhappy in some regards, you kind of want to re-engage in your relationship and see what happens. And even if you do decide that you would prefer to end the marriage and get a divorce, which is fine, by the way, that's a legitimate preference, you still get to decide if you are actually going to take action and do that. So in other words, we don't know what will come out of contemplating ending our marriage until we do it and do a good job of doing it. Now, another thing sometimes people are afraid of is being disloyal to their spouse by thinking about ending the marriage. And on the one hand, I understand this concern. It may sound ironic that people are concerned about this if they've already been cheating on their spouse, but trust me, like, humans are full of contradictions. And sometimes the thought of considering ending a marriage seems like more treasonous to the relationship than going out and having an affair. And this is just how we think sometimes. People think all kinds of things. And if this is you, I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with you if you're thinking this way. You may be thinking, just to finish the thought here, you may be thinking that, like, if you're contemplating a major decision about your marriage that will by definition impact your spouse, they should know what you're thinking. And your intentions for believing this may be great. You know, you may want to be fair to your spouse by letting them know what's up. You may want to, be as transparent as possible going forward. And all of that stuff is fine and potentially great. But I also want to suggest that your mind is your own private domain. You get to think about whatever you want. And censoring yourself or editing yourself within the private territory of your own mind space is unlikely to be helpful. Yes, there may come a point where you decide it's time to tell your spouse that you're considering, your dissatisfaction in the marriage and thinking about whether or not you want to stay in it. But there may be great value in getting your own thoughts in order first. I'm not discounting the value of honesty and communication by any means, but sometimes we blurt out our thoughts about our concerns and our doubts and our possible desires to end our marriage before we even really know what we're thinking. And in doing that, we're essentially saying to someone else, like, here's my mess. Now you get to deal with it too. And that may not be doing anyone much of a favor. And moreover, figuring out what to tell your spouse about your doubts about your relationship and when and how to tell them about these doubts can be a very sneaky way to distract yourself from your first order of business, which is allowing yourself to take a thorough look at what you think about your marriage. You can't be fully honest with someone else if you can't be honest with yourself. But we often try to skip that latter step because we often feel more obligated to be honest with others than to be honest with ourselves. I want to suggest that by allowing yourself to take a close, clear, honest look about what you're thinking about your marriage and to really explore the question of whether or not you want to stay married, you're doing yourself a great service and you're doing those around you a great service. Here's what I mean by that. Staying married because you're too scared to leave and too scared to deal with your fears about contemplating leaving your marriage usually doesn't feel very good for you. And when you are encumbered by not feeling great about not doing something you don't really want to do, or by avoiding a problem you don't know how to face, your energy is taken away from your interactions with the people you care about, or the work you want to do, or anything you want to do in your life. And that isn't ideal for anybody. And in addition, do you really want to stay married to your spouse because you're afraid of divorce or you can't imagine life outside of the marriage? Would you want someone to stay with you primarily because they were afraid to leave? Sometimes people tell me that they can't get divorced. They literally can't get divorced because it would devastate their spouse. And there's always a lot I have to say about that. But for now, ask yourself this. Would you be doing your spouse a favor by staying married to them for that reason? I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. The point I most want to stress for today is that contemplating leaving your marriage does not equate with moving towards divorce. It doesn't equate with deciding you want to get divorced. Giving yourself permission to seriously consider leaving your marriage also does not make you a terrible person. If you've been unhappy in your marriage, whether or not you've been cheating on your spouse, I encourage you to respect yourself and respect your own feelings by allowing yourself to take a close look at what's going on within you. Taking the time and making the effort to acknowledge your dissatisfaction within your marriage might be the best thing you ever do for yourself. It's so ironic that we emphasize fidelity in marriage to such an extreme degree, but we rarely talk about the extent to which being faithful to another person is dependent upon our ability to be faithful to ourselves. And part of what it means to be faithful to ourselves is to allow ourselves to be honest with ourselves about our own thoughts and feelings. So if you have been avoiding the question of whether or not you want to stay married, or ignoring your unhappiness, or trying to sweep all of your dissatisfaction under the rug, you don't have to beat yourself up for doing this. As I said earlier, it's totally understandable, totally human, and very common to try and avoid problems that seem unsolvable. But the question is, do you want to keep avoiding this question for any longer? We tend to think that putting off a decision or putting off contemplating a question or dealing with a problem will make it easier later on, but that is rarely the case. So if not now, then when? If you're putting off contemplating leaving your marriage, what are you waiting for? Now, another thing I really want to emphasize today is that giving the question of whether or not you want to leave your marriage adequate consideration may take some time. And I say this because sometimes clients come to me and they tell me they've been unhappy in their marriage or in their long-term relationship for a long time. And maybe they've been cheating or they are cheating or they've had an affair and it's over. And, in the background, what's been going on is they've been trying to avoid figuring out what they really want, especially within their marriage, but maybe within other areas of their lives too. And then all of a sudden, they finally reach a breaking point and they schedule a session with me. And when we talk, they're like, okay, I need to figure all this stuff out today. I need to decide what I want to do about my marriage right now. And in a sense, this kind of impulse is great. Wanting to get clarity on aspects of your life you have been avoiding is terrific. And wanting to make decisions efficiently is terrific. And decisions can be made efficiently. But that doesn't always mean they can be made quickly. If you have been in your relationship for any length of time, it probably took a while for your current state of dissatisfaction to arise and flourish and fester. And it probably took you a while to decide you wanted to do something about it. So you may not be able to instantly get clarity on what you want. You may not be able to make a decision about whether or not you want to end your marriage in a day or a week or a month. You might, it's possible, but it's also possible that it will take longer than that. And that does not have to be a bad thing. There are probably a lot of important matters you'll want to consider as you contemplate leaving your marriage. And going about this thoughtfully and deliberately is worth the time it takes. How long it takes is different for everyone. And I'm not suggesting this needs to be a long, unnecessarily drawn out process because it doesn't. But to quote Ram Dass, you have to go as fast as you can, but you can only go as fast as you can. When you're contemplating major aspects of your life, you don't want to dawdle and indulge in indecision or avoid tough topics out of fear. But you also don't want to rush to make decisions hastily just for the sake of getting yourself out of the discomfort that is so often associated with uncertainty. And, when I talk with people about whether or not they want to leave their marriage, we talk about a lot of things which usually require a bit of time and deliberation. For instance, we talk about what marriage means to them and what ending a marriage means to them and about them and for them. We talk about their worries about what might happen and talk about ways of developing new relationships with fear. We talk about ways of developing a new relationship with our fear of specific outcomes we're afraid might come to pass. We talk about what they think about their spouse and how they feel about their spouse. We talk about whether or not they want to consider trying to re-engage in the relationship. We talk about what they want their future as a whole to look like. We talk about who they want to be in essence, no matter what happens. We talk about what they want out of romantic relationships in the future, no matter who they're involved with. And of course, we talk about other things too. But the point is, there are usually some pretty significant things to consider when you're contemplating leaving your marriage. You may have the opportunity to question and examine a lot of your habitual beliefs about yourself and about your spouse or your partner, and about how relationships are supposed to be, and about what's possible for you and what's important to you in life. And this is all really important stuff that's worthy of your time and attention. If the task of contemplating leaving your marriage seems too monumental to take on, let me say that although it's not a small thing to consider, that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Even if it's a very significant thing to consider, it is possible to do so deliberately and systematically and to take it one manageable step at a time. You don't have to eat the whole elephant all at once. It's possible to meet your own fears and concerns with curiosity and compassion and to work through them. And although the process of considering whether or not you want to leave your marriage may be a significant thing to do that seems pretty scary, consider the benefits that may come from doing so. Starting first and foremost with clarity and certainty and relief, and the potential to live your life in a way that is more aligned with your desires and your priorities. All right. If you would like help thinking through the question of whether or not you want to leave your marriage, I can help you. Together, we can make this question a whole lot more approachable and a whole lot less overwhelming to contemplate. So if you'd like my help with this, schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. All right, everyone, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you have enjoyed what you've heard, I hope you'll head on over to iTunes to rate and review the show. Until next time, bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.